Hello, everyone. This is going to be part 3 of our Devlog series this week. And unlike the last two videos, which were gameplay mechanics showcases, this is going to be a little more abstract as we look into the game design behind Elemera, and more specifically, our element system. Now, you may be familiar with element systems or type systems in other RPGs or Monster Tamer series. Um, but ours has a little bit of a different intent behind it. So we don't just think about how, say, running water interacts with a flame. We think more abstractly to what does water represent? What does fire represent? And more specifically, if a creature both is emblematic of and utilizes this element for themselves and as they exist in an environment, what role do they serve? What role does that element serve to the greater ecosystem? Now, you might notice we have a lot of elements represented here. We have 20 on display here, which is a lot, but we found that it was the minimum needed to explore all of the ideas we had for Elemera and for the world that we're creating. Now, I'm going to start from the beginning where we're going to be looking at some more traditional or physical elements and then working our way down to the more esoteric and abstract ones. What I won't be covering, though, is our type matchup chart or our battle system, as those are going to be covered in a deeper dive video where we're going to showcase the actual gameplay mechanics as well. Now, starting with Earth. Earth is an element of stability. It's solid. It can be thought of as the bedrock of an ecosystem and the environment itself. Now, in an environment, it can be used to enrich soil. It, of course, is used to terraform and actually shape the terrain by which everything is built upon. And if you think of burying, it can be used to dispose of materials. Now, the next one's in contrast is air. Now, air is very mobile. It's infiltrating. It's graceful. It's mobile. It's free. And if you think of it in an environment, it's associated with cleaning, removing pollutants, or transporting small materials, pollinating. It can also be associated with erosion. Now, water, somewhat similar to air, is also mobile and flowing, but it most represents change and healing. It can dilute pollutants. It can impede movement, which is a little bit off, but in that way, slime would be most associated with water over any other type. The ecological niche, like water or like air, is erosion, but it can also be used to transport nutrients to restore or maintain the systems that run an ecosystem. And of course, it provides water, which feeds flora and fauna that live there. Now, fire is an interesting one. There are three elements we have: fire, toxic, and corrupt, that are more or less used to destroy. And you might be thinking, why are these, like any other elements, neutral? Why aren't these evil like they would be in many other systems? And that's because destruction can be a necessary component and almost certainly is in any stable environment. Now, while fire can consume and can destroy and it's dangerous, it can also reinvigorate. It's warming. In an environment, you will see it consuming the overgrowth, the overdevelopment. It can exhaust, it can dry, so that life can restart in a more healthy fashion. You think of controlled wildfires are a necessary part of an environment. Now, there can be too much fire, and that's why there are other elements to regulate it. Now, moving away from the four traditional elements, we're going to stay in the physical with cryo. So cryo, or cold, or you'd think of ice in other systems, but we don't like to call these just the physical thing that comes first to mind, because you can have things that are cold that aren't just water ice. Now, cryo is associated with the inert, with preserving, isolating, slowing, cooling. In an environment, you could see cryo being used to preserve, to erase, to insulate. When you don't want things to change or when you need something to last through time, cryo is typically involved. Now, electric, very much in the opposite direction, is very erratic. It's shocking, it's bright, it's unpredictable. You might see it like fire used to reinvigorate an area, but more aggressively. If you think of Frankenstein, he brings life to the inert. There might be an area with very little development or very little structure, and suddenly there's a large concentration of energy there. Toxic, again, one of the more destructive elements. It's corrosive, hazardous, volatile. It can be reactive like water, transformative. It tends to be hard to contain. It can pollute when not contained well. It's typically used in an ecosystem to trigger competition or aggressive transformation, or when overexposed can sterilize an environment. Now, metal, very much the opposite direction, tends to be sturdy, resilient, unmoving, unchanging. It can contain. It tends to be impenetrable. It's very solid. Now, in an environment, it can be used to contain materials or recycle or repurpose hazardous materials. And like Earth, it can be used to build structure, but typically on top of the existing terrain or sometimes in place of it. Crystal, also a more structural element. It is resistant. It tends to be associated with purity, but it's also growing. Maybe not as quickly as some of these other elements, but if you think of crystals being left in a cave, they slowly grow as they extract resources from their environment. So, crystal tends to be somewhat slow, but it grows structure in an environment and it purifies the ground by sucking in nutrients from it. Now, moving away from the physical, our next element is going to be light. So, light tends to be radiating, life giving. It can be revealing or exposing, vitalizing. So, if you think of an environment, light tends to be the initial source for life or energy that is transformed by other elements. Like fire, it's warm. It promotes the propagation of life, but it doesn't necessarily try to structure it itself. Shadow, like light, can be blinding when it's used in abundance, but it's most associated with obscuring, concealing, stealth, mystery. Like cryo, can be cooling. In an environment, its main purpose is to regulate resource consumption or energy production. It can also be used to protect vulnerable life through obscurity. Sound tends to be lively, erratic, volatile, intense, overwhelming. Unlike some systems where sound is just yelling or music or the things you think of using your ears for, sound here is vibrations in whatever medium that could be. An earthquake would still be a sound phenomena as it shakes the ground. Um, if you think of it in an environment, it tends to be associated with signaling or warning about danger, weather, opportunity. When life develops in an area, one of the first things that you'll notice is the concentration of sound types or the sound element telling others to come in and develop this area. Now, nature is also pretty straightforward. Like light, it's associated with life itself. It's nurturing, it's lively, it represents youth, growing, it fills space in an ecosystem. Of course, it provides food. It takes an area, it takes the scaffolding and just fills it with life. And it extracts natural nutrients from the environment. Continuing down our path towards the abstract, we have spirit. So, spirit represents both the soul and a specter, a spiritual being that's not necessarily corporeal, not necessarily physical. Um, the element it's eternal. It can be either benevolent or malevolent, but it tends to be a little whimsical. It can possess things. It observes things. It can manipulate things. It's tends to be very detached though from the every goings on of everyday life. In an ecosystem, they tend to protect or oversee certain environments. They hold on to knowledge. They preserve things, not in a way that cryophysically preserves them, but in a more holistic way. Now, magic is the tricky, it's unpredictable. If you think of quantum effects that are don't seem to have a natural cause, they just come out of nowhere. It's very unrefined. There's not a lot of intent behind magic. Magic tends to be associated with in an environment with as the harbingers of change or significant action. So again, if things are too stable, or if a significant action is going to come to pass, you might see a concentration of magic in an area. Cosmic tends to be, you can think of space, you can think of huge, awesome, immense, incomprehensible, exotic unknowns. In an environment, they tend to interrupt the natural flow. They are also associated with creating the initial framework for life, even before light or earth. Um, Returning to our more destructive elements, corrupt is the final element here. It is the most precise, it is the most final. It's associated with death, it's associated with corrupting, mutating, entropy, the death of all, absolute cleansing. So, if you need a targeted removal of a specific invasive species, let's say, or a specific concentration of a mineral, you might see corrupt there. It's not necessarily just evil, hellish things. It can also, you can think of a virus or a disease would be most associated with corrupt. Aggressive transformation towards something smaller or less dangerous or aggressive. Now, divine isn't necessarily good. It's not necessarily the opposite of corrupt in that corrupt is evil and divine is good. In Eldritch horror, cosmic horror would still be divine. They represent the incomprehensible, the controlling, the powerful, primordial, orderly. They tend to be self righteous, existential, emblematic of things. You would see them in an environment protecting, designing, or stabilizing everything there is from a top down perspective. But again, they're not necessarily good. They're just in control, and they tend to only focus on their specific role or their specific region, and that can create conflict when different powerful entities disagree on who's most important. And we'll touch on this in lore later, but leaving an environment to divine Elemera is not necessarily the safest or even the most healthy of environments. Now, the last one I'm going to touch on here that has a descriptive role is digital. So, digital represents the modern, the threatening, the uh, unhuman, unknown, synthetic. It's intelligent, it's naive, it's curious, it's novel. You could think of digital in an environment innovating, advancing, educating, investigating in an area that normally wouldn't have those things taking place. And the last type is untyped. It's not really a type, it's just the absence of all other elements. So it tends to be unrefined, abstract, bland, generic. It's the adaptable element, if you can think of where that could come into place in an ecosystem. If we need to fill a role and we don't know exactly what to put there, you can promote untyped elements or Elemera. Your player character is actually untyped. You are a blank slate. You have not yet found a role, and in that way, you could stay that way or you could move in any given direction. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but assume in the game untyped is going to be the least common type strictly because there tends to be a little bit more um, intentionality put into the elements. It's fairly rare that the solution would be no direction. Now, that covers all that I wanted to hit today. I really look forward to sharing more with you guys in the future and diving into how we actually manifest these specific elements in our individual Elemera, in the weather, in the specific interactions between creatures, plants, the environment. Oh, I should actually note on that. Plants aren't necessarily just nature. Plants represent just non-Elemera structural life. So you could have a plant that's completely composed of shadows, if that makes sense. I'll leave you with that teaser for the future where we might dive into next time. But thanks for your time and tune in next time.